Socrates, the famous philosopher. And you know when Socrates died? So about 2,500 years ago he died. You would think, though, that this is someone on social media somewhere, right? Going on a tirade about millennials or Gen Zs or something. Yes? And that is sort of the point. If someone, Socrates, who is a philosopher, who still is not able to realize his thought in the youth, which is the general and the youth, and that's what is extremely important. Realize what there's where there is where still for us to benefit from our youth. And you know, who is that standoff? You know, the elders are defiant and they're good for nothing, and they're rash and they're hasty, right? And they're unappreciated. And the youth are always going to say these elders are out of touch and they're scared and they're cowardly and they're, you know, outdated and they're too inflexible and they're disposable. So how to strike that balance requires guidance. And this has always been a struggle even until modern times. In the paper, Dr. Latif actually gives a quick timeline of the different phases of even the modern Western world's approach to dealing with youth challenges. You know, like in the 40s and 50s, they were more into basically scare tactics, right? Like scare straight programs. They employed them until they realized, number one, this is not working. Number two, parents are not going to accept it. This is child abuse. It is child abuse, emotion. And so the methods around the 1980s, a dominant approach was basically, in principle, the whole thing. It was called the right? And so no matter where of them going to basically lower the standard or be more lenient, to be able to win them back over and get the youth back on board in a healthy way. But then realize we can't do this because we're not setting an ideal for the team. And so in the past 30 or 40 years is where the theory of PYD came. Positive youth is predicated on the notion that is pure, made to be the best version of themselves at every stage in their life, before awaiting or instead of awaiting the imminent and just sitting there complaining about what the youth should be. And so positive youth development, it sits on 5 pillars. That's the pillars I was referring to at the beginning. 5 major aims, and they call them the 5 C's. The 5 C's. And I simply wish to use this as a structure for the rest of the talk to better appreciate what Islam offers in each of those respects, in each of those needs of the youth. In each of these needs of the youth. And so the first of these needs or aims for positive youth development is that of competence. Competence. To feel competent and to actually be competent. The second of them is connection, to be part of something greater than yourself. Another need. The third of them is character. Have a certain framework and set of principles in terms of your worldview, in terms of your mannerisms, and otherwise that dictate, that your life would be towards some sort of goal, in some sort of, structured fashion, not just liquid, because that's extremely detrimental. The fourth of them is caring. They need to be caring individuals, not self-centered monsters. And the fifth of them was confidence. The fifth of them was confidence. Not just being resilient and knowing that you can if you put in the work, and so you do in fact employ your skills in the best possible directions. This timer is not on, so I need someone to block me. How much time do I have left? 30? Excellent. So 55, I'll stop. Sounds good. And so the 5, say them back to me. Competence. Yes. Second was connection. Third, character. Caring. And to be confident. This is just a framework, right, for us to appreciate what Islam offers with respect to each of these 5. Because nowadays, the year is 2021, going on 2022, there are many challenges our youth face. Marriages, broken families is a huge challenge for the youth and their development. Inflexible education models, that are predicated on the notion that all kids learn the same way, whether they're born type of intelligence or another. Inflexible education models. But all of these odds that are stacked against the youth, the most dangerous of them is them to lose touch of their Islam if we're talking about Muslim youth. And that's a reality because, many of our youth already conceal much of their Islam. They feel like they need to conceal much of their Islam to make headway in society. And you also know that if you conceal this for so long, it's so high, you're just basically going to start dismissing your Islam instead of living 2 lives. You'll probably walk out on it altogether because the pressure is very high. I mean, the stigmatization, the bad sentiment against Muslims, Islamophobia and otherwise. Also simply just being, the minority is difficult. And so we need to make sure the Islam remains in our youth for the purposes of this, for the reason that Islam offers our youth the best chance at best possible light. That is the idea. The absence of Islam is the most dangerous thing to our youth, and any youth, even more so than broken families, even more so than education, even more so than the pervasive, ills and harms and vices and sins of the absence of Islam itself. And so as a minority community, the last disclaimer I'll make or preface is that we can learn much, by the way, from other minority communities. The Italian Americans or even the Jewish Americans and what they face. But there is no better community for the Muslims as a minority to benefit from, especially with regards to these 5. Community. For a number of reasons. Not just because they are 1/3 of the Muslim community, by the way. 1/3 of the Muslim community here is African American. But also because the African American experience has been truly unique. These are people that were brought here 500 years ago, right? Against their will, from an underclass that had nothing to do with the society but be cheap labor for it, and they showed this resilience, right? They showed their adamant refusal to dissolve in society for 400 years. It wasn't even just slavery. It was technically abolished. The segregation, the ghettoization, putting them in separate neighborhoods and otherwise. And to appreciate what they put up with and didn't just survive but thrive despite all of it are perhaps parallels I can draw now quickly in light of the 5 C's and the teachings of Islam. So the first of them is competence. Youth needs to not just know or feel, but in fact the edge they have on others. If I'm just like everybody else, then I'm just another zero, right? I'm just like everyone. I don't offer anything unique. I'm not different. There's nothing desirable about me. No reason for me to be sought out. And so to highlight this of each of our youth is extremely, to not just say the youth are weaknesses, the youth are liabilities. The youth actually have strength, and to help them recognize their actual strengths, not pep talks. Right? Speaking of pride or uniqueness with the African American community, Malcolm X, rahimahullah, I remember when I used to listen to some of his speeches, this may seem superficial, but he used to tell people, he used to tell black people, look at yourself, look at your skin. Other people spend hours and hours in the sun to develop skin like yours. And this is like, he's talking about what exactly? Complexion, right? But I want you to picture what that does for someone that has been told your skin is too dark, your hair is so black, whatever it is, right? What this does, oh, I am desirable. People are actually trying to, catch up to me in certain regards. And, even think about intelligence with our youth. One of the problems why we don't highlight the strengths of our youth is that we are very idealistic or very arbitrary in what we think strengths are. Like, if you're not a doctor, you're a failure. Who said, right? There are many different strengths, many different types of intelligence even. There is, mathematical intelligence, there's emotional intelligence, there's different categories of intelligence. This person is not inferior because they do not become or don't have an aptitude for what we prefer for them. Even outside of strengths as well, in terms of competence, youth that attend the Masjid have strength, a very important strength that we all need, which is reaching the other youth who are not in the Masjid. You need to help them notice this. I'm old, or I have an accent, or I'm too busy, or whatever. I can't reach these youth. Right? I don't know where to begin to find them. You are our access point. Like youth and adults, 70 to 80% of them don't attend the Masjid on Eid even. They don't. These are our actual numbers. And so do these youth not have a strength that we should highlight from? I often tell people we want to get youth in the Masjid. I tell them there's basically three ways people try to get youth into the Masjid. Right? There's people who live on wishful thinking, like, the doors are open, why aren't the youth coming? Right? Like, I gave the khutbah in English. Right? What more do you want? The second level is sort of cater something to the youth, like, come on youth, we have pizza on Friday nights, and I need to be honest, for many ages of the youth bracket, this is patronizing. I can get pizza with cooler people outside. Why do I need to come to the Masjid to get pizza? One of the greatest ways to win youth over is to give them space in the Masjid, right? To feel a sense of like ownership of the Masjid. I used to joke about a youth center that I was fortunate enough to live around as a teenager. They would give us positions that actually meant nothing, but to us at the time meant everything. Like, I am the director of the doorknob. If I don't, the doorknob is going to fall off, right? I'm joking. That wasn't exactly what it was. But like, Dawah table, the director of the Dawah table. What does it mean, right? But to feel like it hinges on me, I'm who keeps Dawah activity alive, was a huge deal. So, honing in on, emphasizing, capitalizing on the competence of the youth and developing it further is one of those five. Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, one time the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he asked which of the trees is most like the believer. And so they began guessing. The Sahaba began guessing left and right, different types of desert trees, and none of them were it. And then ultimately the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, actually it is the palm tree. And so when everyone went their separate ways, Abdullah ibn Umar, the narrator of the hadith, this is in Sahih Bukhari, he says, I said to my father, I knew it was the date palm tree. I was going to say it was the date palm tree. But when you and Abu Bakr were and so Umar radiallahu anhu said to his son, I swear, he said, it would have been the dearest thing in the world to me that my son knew the answer. And so how do you think that makes Abdullah ibn Umar feel? That it is possible that you have some strengths as a youngster that me, the adult, the senior companion of the Prophet ﷺ, his right-hand man after Abu Bakr, doesn't have. So this is important. And then connection. What do we want to say about connection considering the time limitations? Let me draw a parallel again from the African American community. you know, culturally centered narrative. Example, rahimahullah, empowered his movement. You know, it was not, you know, even just religious line. Even if it was ultimately religiously driven for Malcolm, his Islam inspired his social activism, social justice enterprise. It was culturally centered. Even Malcolm, rahimahullah, when he traveled around the world after the Hajj, he came back and said we were doing it all wrong. Not just that Islam is universal for all people. He said we need to stop being the African Americans that are pushing back, become black nationalists, an ally with blacks all over the world, and file a lawsuit. He literally said this. File a lawsuit with the United Nations, right, against the United States for their centuries of crimes. And this was an extremely galvanizing call, to feel like I'm part of a movement now. But the reality is, I'll tell you two things. Many of our youth don't actually feel connected to the global Muslim body. They don't feel connected to anything outside of America, right? A lot of them. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it would actually be weird. It would be wrong if you don't feel connected to the social fabric of this country when you're part and parcel of it. But to not feel connected to Islam as well, right? Thousands of years of sacred tradition. To not feel connected to the Ummah at large, 1.5 billion, it becomes much more difficult to be this, you know, scattered 1% in a wide continent. So that connection is extremely important. You know, that is why learning history is part of survival. You know, I'll never forget in 2008 when the economic meltdown happened and the Obama administration bailed out the bank with, was it $700 million, right? Or $700 billion, I don't even remember. Right? These numbers are all just zeros to me these days. And so when they, of course, you know, when the government bails out private institutions, that's the state, you know, it's like socialism. That's like when that happened, they gave those 700 million, Condoleezza Rice at the time stands up and gives this, like, you know, tribute to the greatness of capitalism and how capitalism is going to survive and so on. And she quoted history, like she was saying, look how great, you know, capitalism is. Why? In capitalism. So what happens when you feel like you're weak, you feel like you're failing, you lean on your history. That's the idea, right? And so our youth, if they don't know history, it is to want to disconnect from the Ummah, because the current weakness of the Ummah is very discouraging, right? A lot of them are, you know, third world countries. You know, they're charitable with us and they call us developing countries, right? Just to be nice, right? But it is very deflating. I don't really want, who wants to associate with weakness, right? If I can use a bad example, would you all be so proud of, what's his name, the retired wrestler, Khabib, right? Right? No one wants to associate. We don't care about your quotes, your wise sayings, we don't care, right? It's strength that people want to connect with, want to associate with. And aspects of our heritage, of our ummah, of our deen, is a survival and a development mechanism for them. And the second of those two issues is family. You know, it is like studies establish that in the age of fatherless homes and in the age of delinquent children, children that want African American communities actually do better than others at retaining their children. And when they probed these studies as to why, they said because, that might help, but it keeps them awake to keep it like this. This is going to become monotonous.
So this allowed for further security in that home and the transition of values, right? Values from one generation to the next. And so we want to say the same thing. Even studies that speak about Muslims that fall out of their faith, they say that the number one factor that from one generation to the next, right? The more the parents are connected to the child, the more the child will want to inherit the religion of the parents. So that's confidence connection. I can project. I'm a yeller, especially on Friday. What do I want to say about character really fast? I want you to widen your conceptualization of character. When you hear character, don't just think akhlaq. No, I want you to think of like your existence, how you define, like how you define your existence, your existential, understanding. Because that character is really about. It's like the structure, you know who you are, you know the principles you live by, you know how you see the world, you know how you make value judgments on the world, and based on that you behave. Just to be consistent, now might be another good time for a Malcolm quote, rahimahullah. He used to very famously say that if you don't stand for something, you fall for anything, right? And so knowing where you stand is very liberating. I know what I'm supposed to do. I know why I do things. Also I know what I will face. As one brother told me, it is so reassuring when Allah tells me, وَلَا تَسْمَعُنَّ مِنَ الَّذِينَ from the beginning in Surah Al Imran, لَتُبْلَوُنَّ فِي أَمْوَالِكُمْ وَأَنفُسِكُمْ. You will be tested in life, right? In your wealth and in your children. وَلَا تَسْمَعُنَّ مِنَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ وَمِنَ الَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا أَذًى كَثِيرًا. And you're going to hear a lot of abuse. Those who receive the book before you and from the idolaters, so much abuse, verbal abuse. You hear, وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا. But if you are patient and you are conscious of Allah, إِنَّ ذَلِكَ مِنْ عَزْمِ الْأُمُورِ. The matters that require or are of valiant, great determination. You're a person of determination. He said to me, like Allah told us, no matter how hard we try to be nice and kind and golden citizens, not everyone is going to like us. And so I don't have to worry about, my job in life is not for you to be pleased with me. Sorry, you're not worth that much. This is also a matter of character. How do you see the world around you? I don't serve you. I serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would carve into the consciousness of youth. Didn't he say to Ibn Abbas? Ibn Abbas only passed puberty when the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam died, after he died, alayhi salatu wasalam. And he said to Ibn Abbas at the end of the hadith, to safeguard you, meaning prioritize this. And he said to him in the end, if the whole world wants to get together to harm you, they're not going to be able to harm you. And if the whole world wants to get together to benefit you, they're not going to be able to benefit you, except in ways that are preordained. رُفِعَتِ الْأَقْلَامُ. The pens have dried. And so I am not here to lick your boot. I am not here for your approval. I require it, not dependent on it. That is of the greatest ways you develop your youth. The famous in the African American experience, she's no Underground Railroad. It wasn't actually, it was a network of safe houses. He would smuggle people through to get them to escape slavery. But there's obviously no documentation how she did what she did. not much. And so some people say she freed 70 slaves, some, very generous, I'm not saying wrong, very different numbers say she freed 1,000 slaves. So in one of the accounts where it is reported that she freed 1,000 slaves, she looks back at her mission and she said, I have freed 1,000 slaves in my life, and I would have freed so many more had they realized that they were slaves. People that had just accepted the status quo. I guess it's supposed to be like this. Things are supposed to be this way. Cannot be any different. This is an issue of character, self-image, how you see yourself. Or I guess this one reminds me of Malcolm again, rahimahullah. Malcolm used to very tersely tell people, you need to make a decision about yourself. Are you a house Negro or are you a field Negro? You guys know the difference. He has a house Negro, his priority is to win his master's approval. I'll do whatever I need to do, no matter how shameful, no matter how disgraceful, make sure I get this. And the field Negro sees that living upright, dignified, with self-respect, even if that means, my mattress is going to be the rocky floor and my blanket is going to be the night sky, I'm the free man here. And so these notions are huge, very important. So that was character. The last two were, let's go, caring and? So developing caring youth, compassionate youth, this is a virtuous cycle, meaning they need to be fed enough care to be able to overflow with care. It has to start with our youth feeling cared for, and at different stages in their life. But it's enough that the Prophet ﷺ, said to us, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ لَمْ يُرْحَمْنَا وَيَرْحَمْ صَغِيرَنَا وَيَعْرِفْ لِعَالِمِنَا حَقَّهُ. They are not of us. They've misstepped in our footsteps, right? Those who don't revere our elders and have mercy, show compassion to our youngsters, know the right of our scholars. And so compassion for the youngsters in particular, sunnah, and its fruits should be obvious. Even the famous hadith of Al-Aqra' narrated by Aisha and Bukhari and Muslim, when the Prophet ﷺ kissed one of his grandsons, he said to him, you kiss your boys? I have 10 kids, never kissed any one of them. Like, this is how you raised of children. And he said to him, قَدْ نَزَعَ اللَّهُ الرَّحْمَةَ مِنْ قَلْبِكَ. What does it do with if Allah has put the mercy from your heart? So, some people, they overlook the importance of, we all love our kids and we all, care for them, but overlook the expression, the importance of expressing enough care, enough concern, enough sensitivity to the youth. And some people actually do this deliberately. They withhold care, assuming that toughness, like Al-Aqra' ibn Habis, radiallahu anhu, right? Toughness is generated through being aloof, through being, especially with boys, right? Being, insensitive. But that's actually not true. And so many of the studies prove this is actually not true. If you treat someone callously, they will either become a criminal, right? They'll become someone without a conscience in many respects, or they'll become a pushover. Like, you'll either push them to that end to replicate you, or you will break them entirely and they'll develop inferiority complexes and all of this baggage that comes with early trauma, and just, be the pawn in life of whoever pushes harder, whoever yells louder. And you don't want either of those. As for the Prophet ﷺ, he would constantly express his care and his, admiration of his boys and his girls. When he said about Al-Hasan, "Inna ibni hadha sayyid," this son, meaning his grandson, of mine is a chief, is a leader, a natural born leader.
and Allah will rectify or reconcile between two warring factions of the believers through him. Why did he say this son of mine? It meant that he was there. He made it a point to say it in his presence. Because part of caring for the youth is validating them, not just being gentle with them when they're infants and toddlers, but validating their need for regard in the public sphere when they become of a certain age. And he used to also say, alayhi salatu wassalam, when his daughter would enter the room, marhaban bibnati, welcome my dear daughter, and he would rise to her and put her where he was sitting, alayhi salatu wassalam. So that's number 4, caring. The last of the 5 quickly is confidence. How do you build confidence? So youth get to a point where they don't care how much you praise them. They need to hear it from others, not the parents. And also they need to see it themselves. And that is why a sense of accomplishment at one point in a youth's development becomes indispensable. They need to feel like they accomplished something themselves. Now here's the trick. Unless you allow them the opportunity to fail, they will not feel like they succeeded. Unless they have to feel that the steering wheel, not literally, unless, right? But not necessarily literally, the steering wheel is in my hands, right? I'm responsible for it. Unless you do that, they're not going to feel accomplished, achieved, that I didn't crash the car, right? I didn't, or I got us to the right location. And so, if you don't give them a chance to fail, they will not, in their minds, have succeeded. And this hurts a great deal their confidence. So, what do we want to do? We want to be careful. In a calculated way, open up the valve for their autonomy, for their independence to independently make mistakes. Sometimes, in a calculated way, right? Don't just walk out altogether and say you're an adult now. No, it's not true. Nuh alayhi salam, was advising his son until the wave separated them. Yes, technically they are adults at 14 or 15 or whatever, but there's a difference between you trying to maximize the benefit in your youth and minimize the harm, and between the technicality of how much you're supposed to be doing before and after that puberty mark. So, in a calculated way, you want to open the valve. And when they make mistakes, also, as part of the learning process, they need to be held accountable. But when they're held accountable, we need to make sure we don't crush them with the accountability. They are not to be dismissed upon their mistakes. And I only have 3 minutes left. The best story to depict this, in how Islam taught us this, is Usama ibn Zayd, radiallahu anhu. It's a very famous incident, reported in so many of the hadith books, that they were at Al-Huraqa, and they got into an altercation, a small battle with some of the mushrikeen, and there was a man killing Muslims left and right, one of the champions of the opposing army, and all of a sudden he takes flight, and so the Muslims are in hot pursuit. They catch up to him, he falls, the two Muslims raise their weapons, and the guy says, La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. I'm like, I'm Muslim now. And so the Ansari man, one of the two men, pulls back. He hesitated and he pulled back. Usama's basically said, I'm not buying that. Like, it's so obvious. You only said it after you tripped. And so he killed him. News of this got back to the Prophet ﷺ in Medina. And actually other narrations mention that Usama himself felt uneasy, radiallahu anh, and so he went and said this to the Prophet ﷺ himself. I did this. And he had already known, ﷺ, because others had reported it. And he told him, you killed him. After he said, La ilaha illallah, he said, Ya Rasulullah, قالها تعوذا. He just said it to protect himself. So obvious. He said, but what will you do with La ilaha illallah on the Day of Judgment? Did you open his chest to check if he actually said it? تعوذا, just to protect himself. And so what will you do with La ilaha illallah? And so Usama felt the weight of his mistake. And he said, Ya Rasulullah, istaghfir li, ask Allah to forgive me. Forgive me and ask Allah to forgive me. And picture it, like the Prophet ﷺ is the ocean of mercy that will never again and never has ever been, matched. You would expect him to say, may Allah forgive you, right? He didn't do that. And this is Osama also. Osama, the son of Zayd. Zayd is the adopted son before, adoption was outlawed in a sense by the Quran and told people keep your lineages. So he's like the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ. He used to love him the way he loved Al-Hasan and Hussein. This is his grandson, right? And he's already rahmatan lil alameen with everybody. And so he's telling him istaghfir li, and yet he doesn't. The Prophet ﷺ wanted to make sure for a little longer that he felt accountable for his mistake. And so he just kept saying to him, what are you going to say with La ilaha illallah when it comes on the day of judgment? What are you going to say with La ilaha illallah when it comes on the day of judgment? And so he held him accountable. But did he allow that mistake of that young man, Osama, to define that young man? He didn't allow that to do so. How do we know? Because the very last army that was dispatched by the Prophet ﷺ before his death, in that army was Abu Bakr himself. The commander of the army was Osama ibn Zayd. And so that balance to build confidence in our youth, authorize them, give them in calculated ways room to make mistakes, hold them accountable when they make mistakes. So they actually felt like, I made the mistake, so I'm the one who avoided the mistake next time around. But do not dismiss them or allow it to define them. Make sure they learn from it, own it, continue to grow out of it. That would be a quick example from the Sunnah as to how to build that confidence in our youth. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. جزاك الله خيرا. Yes, sir. They agree. Now when I go. Bismillah. No, it's not on. It's not on. They told me to take questions. Install. Does anybody have any questions? No questions? Mohammad, you may want to do your Yaqeen presentation. I'm going to make you answer it. I'm going to make you answer it.
Jazakallah Sheikh. Takbir. Takbir. Sheikh, I think you forgot one C, conviction. So, conviction, as some of you might not know, is Yaqeen. Inshallah, again, let me reintroduce myself. My name is Mohammad. I am the Northeast Regional Coordinator for Yaqeen Institute, and I have a pleasure of working alongside with Sheikh Mohammad Elshinawy and a numerous amount of scholars in their respective field. At Yaqeen Institute, what we try to do is do three things. We try to dismantle doubt, nurture conviction, and inspire conscience. If you have been a part or seen our Angel series by Sheikh Dr. Omar Sulaiman, alhamdulillah, we restarted them. So if inshallah, if you want to visit our website or our YouTube channel, you can see it. But we have videos on numerous topics to help dismantle this doubt. But the main purpose I'm here today, inshallah, is to show that we want to work with you. If you are part of the Masjid, MSA, Islamic school, or any youth organization, we want to work with you. We have resources created specifically for grassroots organizations, created by professionals in the field of education and youth development to help the community, inshallah. So before I end, I want to say that if any of you are part of the message, that isn't a partner of Yaqeen, inshallah, come see me. I'll be in the back around here talking to Elshinawy, all the beautiful you around here as well. Just talk to me, inshallah, and we can change contacts, and inshallah, we can work together to help dismantle the doubt in our own community. Is that okay? I think the next session is going to start at 6:15. 6:15. So inshallah, please go enjoy the bazaar that's here, and if you haven't registered, registration is open. Is that okay?